The sandbox felt rough against Tommy Rodriguez's knees as he dug his fingers into the damp sand behind their Riverside home. His mother Diana watched from the kitchen window, smiling as her 5-year-old worked with unusual concentration. Tommy had always been creative, but this was different. For the past hour, he'd been sculpting something with his small hands, rejecting every toy she offered, asking only for water to keep the sand moldable. "What are you making, mijo?" Diana called through the open sliding door. Tommy didn't look up. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he continued shaping, smoothing, carving details that seemed impossibly precise for a kindergartner. "It's not right," he muttered, more to himself than to his mother. "The face is wrong." They changed it. Diana stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. The California sun was warm on her shoulders as she approached the sandbox. What she saw made her pause mid-step. Tommy had built something that looked distinctly like a lion, but not quite. The body was long, powerful, unmistakably feline. But the head was human, and the proportions were strange. The human head looked too small for the massive body, as if it had been added as an afterthought. "Tommy, what is this supposed to be?" "The big stone lion," he said, still focused on adjusting something around the neck area. "But they put the wrong face on it. The man with the beard, he made them carve a new head. The old head was bigger. It fit better." Diana felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Tommy had never shown any interest in lions, had never watched nature documentaries, had never even been to the San Diego Zoo. Their little suburb of Riverside was as far from anything Egyptian as you could get. The most exotic thing Tommy had encountered was the churros at the local Mexican market. "Who told you about stone lions, baby?" Tommy finally looked up, his dark eyes serious in a way that made him seem older than his 5 years. "I carved it. It was my job. I made the body first, then the face, but it was the lion's face. Then the new pharaoh came and said it had to look like him instead." The sand sculpture was remarkably detailed. Diana could see what looked like a mane around the neck, but also something that might have been a pharaoh's headdress. The more she stared at it, the more unsettled she became. Where had he learned these shapes? These concepts? That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Diana called her sister, Rosa. "You need to come see something," she said into the phone. "Bring Carlos, and maybe ask him to bring one of his art books." Carlos Mendoza taught high school art history at Riverside Preparatory. When he arrived the next afternoon with Rosa, Diana led them straight to the backyard. Tommy was there again, this time with a magnifying glass he'd somehow convinced his father to loan him, examining his sand sculpture with the intensity of a jeweler. "Show Uncle Carlos what you made, Tommy." The boy looked up at his uncle, then gestured toward his creation. Carlos knelt down, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine surprise. The sculpture was even more detailed than it had been yesterday. Tommy had added intricate patterns around the base, carved lines that looked almost like hieroglyphs, though they were too eroded to read clearly. "Tommy, this looks like the Great Sphinx," Carlos said carefully. "Do you know what that is?" "It's not called that," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "We just called it the Guardian. And the face is still wrong." Carlos exchanged glances with Diana. "What do you think the face should look like?" Tommy scrambled up and ran into the house, returning with a piece of construction paper and crayons. He sat cross-legged in the sand and began to draw with the same focused intensity Diana had observed before. The crayon moved across the paper in confident strokes, creating a face that was unmistakably leonine. A full lion's head with a mane, but with something almost human in the eyes. "It looked like this," Tommy said, holding up the drawing. Strong like a lion, but wise like a person. The proportions were right. Everything fit. Carlos stared at the drawing, then at the sand sculpture, then back at Tommy. "Where did you learn about the Sphinx, buddy?" "I told you. I carved it." "But Tommy," Rosa interjected gently, "the Sphinx is in Egypt. That's very far away. You've never been there." Tommy's face scrunched up in frustration. "I know where it is. It's near the big pyramid, the tall one. I worked on it for years. My hands got so sore." He held up his small palms as if examining calluses that weren't there. "The stone was so hard. We had copper tools, but they got dull fast." Diana felt her stomach drop. Tommy had never seen a documentary about Egypt, had never been exposed to anything about ancient civilizations. She was certain of it. She controlled his screen time carefully. PBS Kids, some Disney movies, nothing educational that might explain this knowledge. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Carlos returned with an armload of books. "I need to show you something," he told Diana and her husband Miguel, who had just gotten home from his shift at the power plant. Carlos opened a thick art history textbook to a page about ancient Egypt. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a photograph of the Great Sphinx. "See how the head looks small compared to the body? Art historians have debated this for decades. Some think the original was carved with a lion's head, and that it was later remodeled to show a pharaoh's face. The head would have been made smaller to fit the new carving." Miguel leaned forward, skeptical. "So Tommy happened to guess a theory that experts argue about?" "It gets stranger," Carlos said, flipping pages. "Look at these measurements. The Sphinx is 73 meters long and 20 meters high. It's the largest monolithic statue from the ancient world. The head is disproportionately small, exactly what Tommy showed in his sculpture." Diana stared at the photographs, then at Carlos. "You think this is just coincidence?" "I don't know what to think, but I want to try something." The next day, Carlos returned with a colleague from UC Riverside, Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in ancient Near Eastern studies. Diana had agreed to let them observe Tommy, but she was nervous. What if they thought something was wrong with her son? Tommy was in the backyard again, this time working with clay that Carlos had brought. Dr. Chen watched quietly as the boy shaped another version of his sculpture, this one more refined than the sand version. "Tommy," Dr. Chen said after a while, "can you tell me about the tools you used?" Without hesitation, Tommy set down the clay and began describing copper chisels, wooden mallets, rope and lever systems for moving massive stones. His vocabulary shouldn't have included words like bronze hardening and limestone density, but they flowed from him naturally, as if he were describing a project he'd completed yesterday. "The copper had to be replaced a lot," Tommy continued, smoothing the clay lion's mane. "It wasn't like iron, but we didn't have iron yet. That came later, from the people up north." Dr. Chen's pen had stopped moving across her notepad. Copper tools were indeed what ancient Egyptians would have used during the Old Kingdom period. Iron wouldn't be common in Egypt for another 1,000 years. "Tommy, what was the weather like when you were carving?" "Rainy," Tommy said immediately. "It rained a lot then. That's why we had to be careful about the water running down and washing away our work. We dug channels to lead the water away from the statue." Dr. Chen looked up sharply. Egypt's climate had been dramatically different in ancient times, much wetter, with regular rainfall. But that rainy period had ended around 7,000 years ago, long before the traditionally accepted date of the Sphinx's construction. "Did the rain damage your work?" Dr. Chen asked. "It made deep marks in the body," Tommy said, running his small finger along the clay sculpture's sides. "Like scars. We tried to fix them, but the stone was already weakened." The water got deep into the cracks. Dr. Chen made another note. The Sphinx does show extensive water erosion. Vertical channels cut deep into the limestone body. For decades, this had puzzled Egyptologists, since the Sphinx was supposedly built during a dry period in Egypt's history. "Tommy," Carlos interjected, "what did the person look like who told you to change the face?" Tommy's expression darkened. He had a beard, a long black beard that he braided. He wore the double crown, red and white. He said the old face wasn't good enough anymore, that people needed to see his face instead of the lion's face. He said the lion belonged to the old time, but now was his time. Did he have a name? "Khafre," Tommy said, the pronunciation rolling off his tongue with an accent Diana had never heard from her son. "He made us work day and night. My back hurt so much from bending over the detail work." Dr. Chen and Carlos exchanged glances. Khafre was indeed the pharaoh traditionally credited with building the Sphinx, though his name would never appear in any children's book Tommy might have encountered. The next week, Dr. Chen returned with a colleague from the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, Dr. James Morrison, who specialized in ancient Egyptian sculpture techniques. They had prepared a series of tests, not really tests, they assured Diana, just activities to see what Tommy might know. Dr. Morrison spread several photographs on the kitchen table. Close-up images of ancient stone carving work from various periods and cultures. Some were Egyptian, some Mesopotamian, some Greek, some Roman. He mixed them randomly. "Tommy, can you pick out the ones that look like work you might have done?" Tommy studied the photos with surprising seriousness for a 5-year-old. He quickly separated 3 images from the pile, all Egyptian Old Kingdom work, all using the specific tool marks and techniques that would have been employed in the Sphinx's construction. "These ones," Tommy said. "See how the chisel marks go this way?" He traced diagonal lines across one photo. "That's how you cut limestone when the stone has a grain like this. If you cut against the grain, it breaks wrong." Dr. Morrison stared at the child. Understanding limestone grain direction was something that took stone carvers years to master. The photos Tommy had selected showed exactly the technique he was describing. "Tommy, what was the hardest part of the carving?" "The nose," Tommy said without hesitation. "The nose was so big and came out so far from the face. We had to support it from underneath while we carved the nostrils. I was always scared it would break off." Dr. Morrison felt his breath catch. The Sphinx's nose had indeed been massive, over 5 feet long. It had broken off at some point, and supporting such a protrusion during carving would have been exactly the challenge Tommy described. "When did the nose break?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Long after I was gone," Tommy said sadly. "A man with a different religion came. He thought the statue was evil because it had a face. He broke the nose with hammers and ropes, but that was much, much later." Dr. Morrison made a note. The Sphinx's nose had been deliberately destroyed in the 14th century by a Sufi Muslim named Sa'im al-Dahr, who considered the statue idolatrous. Napoleon's army, often blamed for the damage, wouldn't arrive in Egypt until 1798. 400 years too late to be responsible. Diana had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement and concern. "How does he know this stuff?" she asked Dr. Morrison quietly, while Tommy played with the clay again. "I don't know," Dr. Morrison admitted, "but I want to try one more thing." He produced a detailed architectural drawing of the Sphinx, a cross-section showing the internal structure of the monument. The drawing was technical, meant for archaeologists and engineers, not something a child would ever see. "Tommy, does anything look wrong in this picture?" Tommy studied the drawing, his finger tracing along the lines. Suddenly, he shook his head vigorously. "No, no." There's supposed to be a chamber here. He pointed to a spot beneath the front paws. We carved out a space for the offerings. And here, he indicated another area between the front legs. There's a passage that goes down. Dr. Morrison felt his hands go cold. Modern ground-penetrating radar had indeed detected what appeared to be chambers and passages beneath the Sphinx, exactly where Tommy was pointing. But those discoveries were recent, highly technical, and certainly not public knowledge that would reach a 5-year-old in Riverside, California. If you're starting to feel like Tommy's story might be challenging everything you thought you knew about memory and consciousness, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happened when the experts decided to test Tommy's knowledge against the latest archaeological discoveries is going to make everything I've told you so far seem ordinary. Dr. Chen arranged for one more test. Through her contacts at UCLA, she'd gained access to unpublished research from recent Sphinx excavations. The data came from high-tech scanning equipment that could see beneath the monument's surface, revealing details about its construction that had never been made public. Tommy sat at the kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper, drawing yet another version of his sculpture. This time, Dr. Chen asked him to draw what was inside the statue. Inside? Tommy looked puzzled. Yes. What's beneath the stone? What you can't see from outside. Tommy's crayon began moving across the paper. He drew what looked like a network of natural limestone cavities and man-made chambers connected by narrow passages. The level of architectural detail was stunning. Not the simple tunnels a child might imagine, but complex structures that showed understanding of ancient engineering principles. When he finished, Dr. Chen compared his drawing to the confidential scanning results on her tablet. The match was so precise that she had to check the data 3 times. "Tommy," she said, her voice barely steady, "why did you put chambers in these specific places?" "For the ceremonies," Tommy replied matter-of-factly. "When the sun comes up exactly between the 2 big pyramids, the light goes down into the chamber under the paws. We put the golden disc there to catch the light. It was supposed to wake up the guardian spirit." Dr. Chen's hands were shaking as she made notes. The chamber Tommy had drawn aligned perfectly with the astronomical orientation of the pyramids, an alignment that created a specific solar phenomenon on the dawn of the spring equinox. This astronomical relationship had only been discovered and calculated in the last decade using computer modeling. "Tommy, what was in the golden disc?" "Writing," Tommy said. "Really old writing, from before the pharaohs. It told the story of who the guardian really was. But Khafre made us cover it with stones. He said people shouldn't read the old stories anymore." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of writing?" Tommy thought for a moment, then began drawing symbols on another sheet of paper. They weren't hieroglyphs. They were more primitive, more geometric. Dr. Chen recognized them as pre-dynastic Egyptian script, a writing system that predated hieroglyphs by thousands of years. A writing system that Tommy should have had no way of knowing existed. "These symbols, Tommy, what did they say?" "That the Guardian was built to watch for the return of the Star People," Tommy said simply. "When the bright star in the Hunter constellation comes back to the right place in the sky, they'll come back too. The Guardian was supposed to be a signal to them." Dr. Morrison felt the room spinning slightly. Tommy was describing the precession of the constellation Orion, a 26,000-year astronomical cycle that ancient Egyptians did track, but which modern science had only recently confirmed they understood in sophisticated detail. As the weeks passed, Dr. Chen continued visiting Tommy. Each conversation revealed more impossibly precise details. Tommy described the exact mixture of limestone types used in different parts of the Sphinx. He knew about the internal stress fractures that modern engineers had discovered only through ultrasonic testing. He could explain why certain sections of the carving had been done in specific orders to prevent structural collapse. More disturbing was his knowledge of people and events. He described other workers by name: Kemtep the foreman, Ankh Efen Sekhmet, the master carver, Kamwasit, the astronomer who calculated the celestial alignments. He knew about palace politics, about Khafre's conflicts with the priests of Ra, about the economic strain that the massive construction projects placed on the kingdom. Most unsettling of all was Tommy's emotional connection to the work. Sometimes he would stop mid-sentence while describing the carving process, and his eyes would fill with tears. "It was so beautiful before," he would say. The lion face was perfect. It looked like it was alive, like it might stand up and walk away. When they made us change it, it broke my heart. All those years of work, and then they just chopped off the face and carved a new one. Diana found herself lying awake at night, wrestling with questions that had no reasonable answers. Her son's knowledge was too specific, too technical, too emotionally connected to be explained by any normal means. But the alternative explanations were impossible to accept. Dr. Chen arranged for one final test. She'd contacted colleagues in Egypt who had access to newly discovered chambers within the Sphinx itself, chambers that had been sealed for millennia and only recently opened using robotic cameras. Via video call from Cairo, Dr. Amara Hassan held up her tablet, showing footage from inside one of the chambers. The image was grainy, shot by a fiber optic camera threaded through a tiny hole drilled into the monument. "Tommy," Dr. Chen said, "can you tell me what should be in this room?" Tommy studied the fuzzy video feed, then pointed to a corner of the screen. There should be a stone shelf there, carved right into the wall. And on the shelf, 7 copper bowls. Each bowl has a different metal inside: gold, silver, iron, tin, lead, copper, and one with mercury. Dr. Hassan adjusted the camera angle, following Tommy's directions. The fiber optic lens revealed exactly what he had described. A carved shelf with the remnants of 7 metal bowls, their contents long since evaporated or corroded, but still identifiable through spectrographic analysis. "The mercury bowl was for seeing visions," Tommy continued. "The priests would look into it during the ceremonies and see pictures of the future. They saw the great library burning. They saw the temple stones being carried away to build other cities. They saw the desert covering everything. That's why they sealed the chambers, to keep the sacred objects safe until the star people returned." Dr. Hassan ended the video call in stunned silence. The mercury residue had been confirmed through chemical analysis, but that information hadn't been published anywhere. Only the research team knew about it. Diana stood in her backyard that evening, watching Tommy play in his sandbox. He was building something new now, not the Sphinx, but a pyramid. The proportions were mathematically perfect, the angle of the sides exactly matching those of the Great Pyramid of Giza. He worked without measuring tools, without references, as if the correct proportions were simply obvious to him. "Miho," she called softly, "do you remember how you learned to build that?" Tommy looked up at her with those serious dark eyes that sometimes seemed to hold too much knowledge for a 5-year-old. "I didn't learn it, Mama. I remembered it." The distinction sent chills down Diana's spine. Tommy wasn't claiming to have been taught these things, or to have read about them. He was claiming to remember them, as if they were his own experiences, his own life. Dr. Chen had explained the implications as gently as possible. If Tommy's knowledge was genuine, and the evidence was becoming overwhelming, then they were facing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness. memory, and the nature of human identity. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Diana sat with Miguel in their living room, surrounded by books about ancient Egypt that Dr. Chen had left for them. The photographs of the Sphinx looked different now, not like a distant monument from an ancient civilization, but like something familiar, something personal. "What if it's true?" Diana asked her husband. "What if Tommy really was there?" Miguel, practical and skeptical by nature, had been struggling with the same question. Even if it's true, he's still our son. He's still Tommy. He still likes cartoons and ice cream and building sandcastles. Diana nodded, but her mind was racing with deeper questions. If Tommy carried memories from another life, what did that mean about all the assumptions she'd held about death, about consciousness, about the soul? What did it mean about the nature of time itself? Tommy's case has left researchers with more questions than answers. His knowledge appears to be genuine, verified by experts in multiple fields using the latest archaeological techniques. But accepting his knowledge as real means accepting implications that most people aren't ready to consider. The experts who studied Tommy have quietly compared notes with colleagues around the world. They've discovered other cases. Children who remember building ancient monuments, who know details about lost civilizations, who carry knowledge that should have died with their civilizations thousands of years ago. Next week, I'll share the story of a 7-year-old girl in England who claims to remember being a temple priestess in ancient Thebes. What makes her case even more remarkable is that she accurately predicted where archaeologists would find a burial chamber that had been lost for 3,000 years. And she was right. Her story might change how we think about the relationship between past and present, between memory and identity, between one life and the next.